Hello, welcome to Rancho Murrieta's online Sunday service. My name is Rachel. I'm one of the pastors with the church here, and we are just so excited to be able to be with you in your homes today. I miss my church family incredibly, but there's something a little fun about being online too. We kind of get to be seen by people just not only here that attend our church on site when we could meet. So hey, if you're listening or watching and you are in a different part of the country, just go ahead and comment with where you're from so we can have a little bit of fun with that and say hi to you. So we are in week 3 of Between Two Ears. And if you haven't had a chance to watch the first 2 weeks, please go check them out on our YouTube channel. You can find us at Rancho United and just select Murrieta, and all of our services will be there for you to be able to watch. I also did want to say thank you. I was interviewed last week in regards to shame and how that had messed with my head between my 2 ears. And I did receive several messages from people saying thank you and that they could relate and things like that. So I just wanted to say thank you for those messages and for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about it. I've kind of found in my life when I am able to speak about my past experiences and what Jesus has done in my life, it's really healing for me and continues that healing process for me. So thank you, and thanks for those messages for those of you who reached out. This week we have Steve interviewing a couple in regards to failure and how that messed, a little bit in between their heads and how they got through that. So I hope you'll enjoy the message today. And for now, we're going to head over to Emily and Travis for some worship.
Good morning, Rancho Murrieta. Travis and Emily here. We miss you. We love you. Let's worship. You called out into darkness. You reached out. To the risen King, it's him up, lift him up, never gonna stop singing. Every tribe, every tongue, every heart will sing, every knee we will bow to the risen King. Lift him up, never gonna stop singing. Never gonna stop, higher, higher, hearts burning bright like a fire, fire.
Well, thank you so much, Emily and Travis, and welcome as well from me to Rancho Murrieta. I'm excited to continue on our series, Between Two Ears. And, today we're talking about something that, man, I got to tell you, I've been wrestling with this week, and it's this idea of failure. And if there's anything I've learned, probably everyone at some time in their life has experienced failure. Even if it hasn't been a major failure in some area, but just the feeling of maybe even being a failure in between these two ears of ours. I maybe even have to go back to your high school days, and you failed that test, or you didn't make that team, or there was a relationship that didn't seem to work out. I mean, so many different things. Maybe you were fired from a job at some time, or, just didn't get that promotion. I mean, there's so many different ways. Or maybe you did go through a major failure. Maybe you did, blow it in some area of your life, or lose something that you were building. I mean, a lot of different ways. I still remember one of my first memories of failure was probably around in 8th grade, and it was going to be our 8th grade party was coming up, our dance. And I grabbed Courtney and I took her around the corner and asked Courtney, will you go to the 8th grade dance with me? And she just looked me straight in the eyes and said no. I know that might sound kind of cheesy, but man, that is one of my early memories of feeling like a failure, especially having to go back and tell my friends. Well, we can all have failure in different ways. We can all feel it in between our ears at different times. I want to introduce you to some incredibly good friends of mine today, Doug and Carrie Vomsteeg. And if you go to Rancho Murrieta, you've probably met them. You'll notice them when you see them up on the screen. We've been friends for about 25 years. They spent 12 years in Baja, Mexico as missionaries. And right before they left, Doug was a teacher and a very successful one. And Carrie was at home with their first child. And they hadn't experienced many feelings of failure up to that point. But they ended up running 2 different ministries that they founded. One was, a gap year program for kids that just graduated from high school. And then when they shut that down, they began to focus on business as missions, and they worked with wine supply store and some wineries in the area. And they were doing that for 12 years. Well, 2.5 years ago, all that shut down. And they had to return back to the States, and they landed back here in the Valley. And through these, and even though those ministries in Mexico were far from failure, they were not failures at all. They did struggle with the feeling of failure, especially on their way back here to the States. So they want to share a little bit about their journey with you. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. So let's join Doug and Carrie now. Man, Doug and Carrie, thanks so much for joining us here today between these two ears. And I'm really excited about our time together. I guess I just want to start off when you 12, 13, 14 years ago moved down to Mexico and you became missionaries for the first time. Did failure ever creep into your ear? Did you ever deal with that when you were down there? And if you did, what was that like? And how did it affect you? Carrie, I want to start by asking you, what was that like for you? What kind of failure did you face in your head?
So yes, the answer is yes. But I think it stemmed more from the expectation or the belief that this is what a missionary looks like. And we were very unconventional missionaries. We didn't do the typical door-to-door. We were running a gap year program. So for me, it was like, they're calling you a missionary, but you're not acting or looking or feeling like a missionary. So I felt like I wasn't doing it right most of the time. I wasn't doing parenting the right way. I wasn't getting up at 3 a.m. for devotions. I wasn't doing all the things that felt like the word missionary should feel or look. And so it felt like I wasn't measuring up most of the time.
What about you, Doug? How did you, kind of like leading this discipleship program, doing the things that you did you ever find failure creep into your head a little?
Oh, heck, almost every day.
Yeah.
It seemed. I'm often the most critical of myself. And that's just another character flaw of who I am and who I was and who I'll continue to be. And so daily, I would, is this where we're supposed to be? Is this what we're supposed to be doing? Am I caring for the students? Am I caring for the community? Am I doing all these right things that Carrie alluded to that conveys that we're working hard for those who give to us, also working hard for God's calling upon our lives down there? There was always this feeling of maybe a lot of inadequacy, a lot of inability, a lot of wrong turns, it seemed, and come to find out there were a lot of things that went right, but we're here to talk about what also went wrong.
Well, and amazing things went right. I mean, I got to be part of this ministry from the get-go, and the way you guys impacted people's lives. And I know sometimes people get the idea, well, look at all the lives you're impacting. You're doing this thing for God, not understanding that in between your two ears, it's a struggle. And then you went from kind of shutting the first part of the ministry down and starting something else back up, doing mission as business. You thought of, hey, let's take people that are out of college and have a little bit more of a, I want to go do business somewhere. How did that transition go? Was there a time, you never were a businessman that I knew of you, were there times of struggling with failure during that journey as well, from going from one thing to another?
Yeah, I think we thought about doing blueberries. We thought about working with unrepresented women and doing business. They had all these ideas, and we did all these case studies to determine what would be best. And then what came back to us was an idea that just seemed so unheralded and uncharted with, yeah, let's do a Christian business that involves wine and beer in our local community, because there were 100 wineries in the area. And so there was a lot of pushback from people, and I'm not saying it wasn't justified. It's they're managing God's funds, and that's what they felt they didn't want to be part of. But yeah, there was a tremendous amount of self-doubt, self-confidence that was part of this. But boy, by the time that we committed to this, we got quite a few different pastors that said, you should maybe consider this. And then our local pastor at the time says, nope, I go with this. When we had the confidence of 4, 5, 6 different people that said do this, we just marched ahead and tried to push back the doubters or those that said this wasn't a good thing to do. I'm not saying that's the best approach, like I said, or she said, we're unconventional. We just felt a real deep calling, but that calling didn't mean that there wasn't a lot of doubt and there wasn't a lot of sense of failure. There wasn't a sense that what we were doing might not be the best.
And it was in your feeling of wanting to be a man of integrity and a couple and a ministry of integrity that caused that to not work out. And so when you realized that that was not going to happen and you put all this time into it, you finally decided we're moving back to the States, we're shutting this down, go back to teaching. How did you deal with that? And was there ever a time inside your head, or maybe still to this day, you know, where the feeling of failure and you wrestling with that? How did you deal with that in your mind, and what did you go through?
Moment of vulnerability. Talking about the stuff between the ears is hard for me to do, but the essence is I'm filled with hubris and pride, and I work hard to do these things when in almost everything we do, and then to deal with this moment of failure. I really said, God, you brought us here 15 years ago. We sold everything. We put everything basically like in a coffin, so to speak. We're going down here to basically die. We weren't moving back. So we were all in. We loved it. We saw so many things that God was doing to keep us there. And then now all of a sudden we have to make this choice to come back. I essentially, with everything we packed up in our home, every mile closer to Temecula, I basically put God more on trial. With every step closer here, the trial got more and more intense in my head towards Him.
Right.
I said, what, we did these things, God, and yet we now have this to deal with, and this to deal with, and this to deal with. I thought I was doing the right things. And so really, as the closer we came to Temecula, the bullfight got bigger and bigger in my mind. And God was becoming that meaner, uglier, nastier bull whose nostrils kept flaring, his hooves kept getting sharper, the what are those called? Horns kept getting bigger and more ominous. And the more big God got in my mind of how angry I was towards this, the more I was ready to fight even further. So there was a lot of tension going on in my brain about where was His goodness right now when we put it all in.
Yeah. And thank you for being honest with that. I mean, I've been in this journey with you, and it was probably a few days ago when you told me that you never told me that before. And thanks for being honest with that. Carrie, what about you as a mom and bringing your boys? I know it was hard for them to come back. How did you feel as a mom and the things you were dealing with coming back to the States?
Yeah, so I don't think any mom ever feels like they're doing 100% great job, but I remember hearing about parents in the past who made a big move, and they had teenagers, and I thought, what a terrible time to move kids. Why would you do that? That just seems, if you could avoid it, why would you move kids at that age? So then, of course, that happened to us. But when God is moving you, as Christianese and trite as that sounds, all these doors are slamming shut on us, it felt like, and all these doors are opening up. So if that's happening and it's super clear that he's moving you, I had to just be at peace with the fact that God wasn't going to wake up one day and be like, oh, shoot, I forgot you have 2 kids in this. Okay, never mind. We're going to change the plan. He knew it was going to be okay. Our boys actually came back and just jumped in with 2 feet. And I don't think they were scared of moving. It was kind of like an adventure, of course, leaving their friends and the slower lifestyle and tacos and mud. That's sad. But they came to the land of opportunity, which makes us sound like immigrants, but they had never lived here before. Our oldest had, but he didn't remember it. They had never been to a U.S. school. And so I felt like I was failing them as a parent. Like, I'm sorry, I'm ripping you away from everything you know and taking you to this country that's not necessarily the best, but everyone thinks it is, and I promise it'll be good, but I can't really promise that. It was confusing, and I was just praying constantly that they would be okay. And what ended up happening is they did great and took off, and the 2 of us are like, what are we doing here? Yeah. We were the ones who had a harder time.
I mean, when Brock came back, he goes, they have carpet
Yeah.
in their schools.
First
They
day of
have
school.
air conditioning.
Yep.
And we're like, we just forgot this is what it was
Yeah,
like.
everything was new. They had never read a novel in English. They had never written a paper in English. Their first language was Spanish, reading and writing. So in school, they struggled a little bit. But other than that, they were couldn't believe how many sports we had here besides soccer. So as a parent feeling like I'm failing them, this is terrible, I'm going to mess them up, we are making these decisions and they don't have a choice in this, and it turned out the opposite way. They just flourished, and we had other things to
And
deal
you're
with.
dealing with it,
For
yeah.
the parenting side, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, then you get here. You've been on this journey. How has the peace of God that we've been talking about in this series, this knowledge of the peace and the grace and the love of God, how has that helped you in this feeling of failure to just journey in it and through it and wherever you are
Yeah.
today? And Doug,
Yeah.
what's that been like for you?
Well, as I alluded, it wasn't easy here or anywhere, just because of the mental battle that I was having, like this imminent face-off was going to happen. Yeah. And when we came into Rancho, and there was this new idea that was kind of being talked about with grace and this whole transactional idea. And I came and still operated for so many years. I mean, even in Mexico, I operated from a performance-based Christianity. And if we did these things, then therefore this would be the result. And that was part of the transaction I was having in my head. And then I'm now here at Rancho going, wait a minute, this isn't transactional, it's transformational. And grace is so much more than that. And with each week, me considering this aspect of grace and widening the lens, what I quickly discovered, and it wasn't something that happened overnight, but that big bull that I was creating in my mind became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, to where now, honestly, through the lenses that we've been learning here, how grace journey has become more understandable and permeates more aspects in my life. It's now like that bull has now become just a little calf that comes up and just hangs with me and just returns to me. And so I just see not God as this big menacing, threatening thing, but like, no, this beautiful lamb, this calf that just wants to come and be part of my journey. So I don't think this would have happened had Rancho and this new, approach or new perspective on how grace can be seen and done and operated through differently. So I found it very liberating for me. And the wrestling match is gone. Doesn't mean it's going to continue to not return on certain aspects, but between my ears, a greater sense of calm, a greater sense of peace, a greater sense of knowing that God as the calf is running to you, not in a menacing pose, but in one that just is very liberating and comforting.
Well, thank you guys so much just for sharing a little bit of your journey with us. I love you too, so much. And thanks for your vulnerability today. And thank you for joining me in between these 2 ears. And love you guys.
Love
Thanks.
you too.
Love you.
Man, Doug and Carrie, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing with us and being vulnerable with us today. I looked up failure, and it basically means like a lack of success, non-fulfillment, defeat, collapse. So you can see that it can cover a wide range of experiences and feelings. But my question today is kind of like, how can we face it? How can we better journey through it or within it? No matter how small or how large our failures might be. And I'm not just talking about when, we fail in something, but when we struggle with the feelings of failure or even the feeling of being a failure. What goes on in between this head, and how might we journey in that? I don't think I have to make a list right now, right, of potential failures. I bet you most people listening to this have their list, can remember their moments, and so I don't need to make a list for you. But I do want to say, when I think about, and I was thinking about the scriptures and going into the Bible, there's this huge failure in there that always stands out to me when I think of failure. And it's from Peter, the Apostle Peter. And if any of you guys know this story, he denied Jesus 3 times. At the most critical time in Jesus' life, when he's being ushered after being arrested through the courtyard as he's about to get tried and beaten and crucified, Peter, one of his main apostles, denies even knowing him. 3 different times he denies knowing him. Well, how does that feeling of failure affect Peter? Well, in Luke chapter 22, kind of captures what his emotion was. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Oh, he had failed. And he was weeping bitterly, violently, it says, as he had to sit in that failure. I mean, the beauty part of this, this story is that, Jesus raises from the dead, and he does come to Peter, and he restores Peter. He journeys with Peter, and what a beautiful restoration process that they go through. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is what Jesus said to Peter before he denied him. When Peter was arguing, "I will never deny you," Jesus, when he tells him that he's going to, says that he's going to be sifted like wheat. And then he tells him this in Luke 22:32, "But I've prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail." Oh, I want us to just think about that. And I don't know why, but throughout this week, as I've considered failure, and actually even experiencing the feeling of failure, man, this passage deeply stood out. That Jesus was praying for Peter, and he was kind of telling him, even though you will fail, and you will feel like a failure, your faith will not fail you. And I have to say, I don't think Peter's faith did fail him. Later on, he writes a couple books in the New Testament. One of them, I think, really captures how deep faith had become for him. It's in 1 Peter 1. He says, "In this you greatly rejoice, though for now, or a little while, you may have to suffer grief of all kinds of trials." And Peter suffered those things. He suffered in that denial. He suffered in other areas. But look what he says. "These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may prove to be genuine and result in praise, glory, and honor when Christ is revealed." And I can't help but think that this verse just flows out of his experience, right? Flows out of his failure and grief, where he came to realize, as Jesus prayed, your faith won't fail. That faith was of such a great worth to him. You see that no matter what fire of failure one might go through, faith is of greater value. It'll never fail you. But that begs the question, faith in what? I know it's faith in God, but what is our faith for? What are we hoping for? And all week that's been thinking about that question, and one main reality came to mind. And I have to tell you, it's where my faith lies the most. At least I hope it's where it lies the most. But before I do that, I want to tell you where my faith doesn't lie. It's not about like trusting that all things are going to work out, that God's going to, doors and windows closed, he's going to open up a window. It's not, my faith is not that God has something better for me, like a better relationship or a better job or business or anything like that, And I'm not saying those things don't happen and we don't rejoice in those things. They do all the time. But how many of you have found that that's not always the case, right? And so that can fail. If the faith that, some circumstance thing is going to be better, then that can fail. So that's just not where I think what Jesus is saying, your faith won't fail. I don't think that's where he's insinuating. So when I think of faith and where I place my trust, that's of greatest worth, where is that? What is that? You see, because it's not about God making my failure into a success, but about God being present during my failure and empowering me to move within it. Faith that will not fail is trusting that God is always with us. I even found it interesting that in that restoration process was about Jesus coming to Peter, his presence coming to Peter, that resurrected presence is still ours today. Hebrews 13:5 says, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. What a promise and hope that no matter how I might fail, God will never leave us. He will never forsake us. His love, grace, mercy for us is always available, and it's always enough, and it will always be there. And I know how hard that can be to believe at times. And especially when the feeling of failure can be so deep and so real. Maybe you did something that hurt someone else, or you felt like you let someone down that was counting on you. Seeing your life and actions having a negative effect on others, that could create deep feelings of failure. And the pain can be traumatizing for sure. Paul dealt with something. He's one of the apostles, one of the followers of Jesus, and he's one of the main writers of the New Testament. He faced some kind of thing. He actually talked about it, and he called it a thorn in his side. He said there was this constant thorn in his side. I mean, what a visual, right? Something poking into our side that is continuously causing an ache. Doesn't say what that thorn was. A lot of people make speculations, but for some of us, I bet you that thorn might be deep feelings of failure. That might be what's constantly stabbing us in the side, like constantly nagging us of where we fell short or reminding us of the people that we hurt. Well, in that, I have this thorn in my side, Paul says something very powerful and very deep in 2 Corinthians 12. He says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take this away. Like, take this thorn, this thing that's aching me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul goes on, he says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. Again, man, I don't know what Paul's thorn was, but I do believe for many, like even for myself, the feeling and reality of failure it can feel like a huge stab in the gut that just doesn't want to go away, right? And as Paul did, I want to believe that if our thorn is failure, right, that we can trust that God's grace is sufficient, his forgiveness, and his love as the power to transform us in the inside, and the power of Christ's presence is right there with us, never leaving us or forsaking us. And this is the self-talk, right, that we need to constantly remind ourselves of. It doesn't eliminate our responsibility in areas where we have failed. We still have to face those, and there are consequences for them for sure, right? And no doubt we need to accept and walk in that reality. But by God's grace and presence, we can find strength to embrace our failures and the power to move in the right direction from them. And I in no way want to act like this is easy. It's not. In many cases, it could be a long journey. And we can fail in many ways, and it can have a huge impact on our own lives and the lives of people we love. I mean, that is real. But God's grace is sufficient. Allow it to wash over you. And His presence is real. Allow it to empower you. And our circumstances might not change. That the consequences of our failures might be big, but God can begin a beautiful work that begins with and can empower us, like it, to rest and to move, to accept and to make changes. I'm not going to lie, but today I speak to you as someone that's holding on to this hope for some people that I love very much, and as well as for myself. And I'm praying that prayer constantly in that Philippians 4:7, and the peace of God, the peace of God that transcends all understanding, may it guard our hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I can tell you, I'm praying that for you today. Anyone that is struggling with failure, may the peace of God guard your heart and mind today. That's His presence. That comes through His grace that is sufficient for us today. And may your faith that God is present right where you are, no matter what, may that help you experience His grace and be empowered to keep moving in and through your failures. Let's pray. Oh, Father, the weight of failure can be heavy. Whether you mean to do something, don't mean to do something, whatever, it could just be heavy, and it could be like that thorn, like that constant nagging. But you are with us. Your grace is sufficient for us. In your presence, the power of your presence is in us. As we know that we are forgiven of hope because we see the beauty of your forgiveness on the cross, and we believe that we have resurrection of life through your resurrection. May we experience that grace and that peace that helps us to embrace our failure and to keep moving in the midst of it. So just be with all of us as we are wrestling with this whole pandemic, continuously the wrestling with this different things going on in our lives. May we experience your presence today. May we know it to be true, because that faith that you are here will never fail, because you are. Because you are. May that have a profound impact in our hearts and minds. For your glory and honor. In Jesus' name. Amen. Well, man, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We'll continue on this series next week. And I just want to continue to thank everyone that has been faithfully giving to Community Mission of Hope and to Rancho. And it's just such a blessing to see the support that comes in. If you want to give to our ministries, there's a few different ways that you can. You can text any amount to that number, 951-339-3554. You can get to our Rancho app on your phone, and you could download the stuff there. You can give online there. Or you can go online to rancho.tv giving, and you can give there as well. So just thank you again so much for you that have been faithfully giving to the ministries here at Rancho. We definitely feel the love. We definitely feel the support. And we hope that you do as well. It's great having you join us here today. Stay connected online at our YouTube, at Facebook. Our YouTube is United, Rancho United and Rancho United Murrieta. We have a bunch of videos on there. All the sermons are on there and different things, children's ministry stuff. So stay connected. Hope to see you next week.